Stress and addiction are two of the most universal and persistent challenges we face as human beings. They operate not just in the domain of emotion or behavior, but within the deepest circuits of the brain and body. The good news is that science has made tremendous strides in uncovering tools, real, actionable tools, that can help us regulate stress more effectively and override the compulsion loops that sustain addiction. These are not vague ideas or metaphysical concepts. These are protocols rooted in neuroscience, physiology, and psychology that anyone can begin applying, often with immediate benefits. Let's start with stress. At its core, stress is a physiological and psychological response to perceived threat or unpredictability. When we encounter something stressful, an angry email, a financial setback, a painful memory, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in. This is the so-called fight or flight system. The pupils dilate, heart rate increases, respiration quickens, cortisol and adrenaline are released. And while this system is essential for survival, when chronically activated, it leads to everything from poor immune function to poor decision making to burnout. One of the fastest and most reliable ways to regulate stress is through the autonomic nervous system. This can be controlled consciously through breathing. There is a pattern called physiological sighing, which involves 2 inhales through the nose, one deep followed by a short top-up, then a long, extended exhale through the mouth. This method, which occurs naturally during sleep and moments of physiological reset, has been shown to rapidly reduce levels of carbon dioxide in the blood and shift the body from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. Just 1 to 3 cycles of this breathing pattern can reduce stress in real time. It doesn't require years of training. It's immediate, it works, and it's accessible. Another science-supported method for stress mitigation is deliberate cold exposure. Immersing yourself in cold water, whether it's a cold shower or ice bath, for even just a minute or two can dramatically increase dopamine, norepinephrine, and endorphins. These chemicals elevate mood, enhance focus, and reduce inflammation. The cold acts as a hormetic stressor. In other words, it temporarily stresses the system in a controlled way that actually increases your capacity to handle real-world stressors. What we find is that people who engage regularly in cold exposure report a heightened sense of control, reduced anxiety, and increased resilience. The key is consistency and making it voluntary. You choose the discomfort, which builds a psychological buffer against the discomforts you don't choose. Let's also talk about vision. Most people don't realize that your eyes are actually part of your central nervous system. They are not just seeing devices, they are regulation devices. During stress, our visual system narrows. This tunnel vision is adaptive in danger but problematic in modern life. One of the fastest ways to calm the nervous system is to deliberately expand your field of vision. This is known as panoramic or optic flow vision. Simply go outside, ideally in natural sunlight, and widen your gaze. Allow your peripheral vision to activate by not focusing on anything in particular. Just let your awareness soften and your eyes take in the whole scene. This naturally reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear and threat detection center. Even a few minutes of this practice can reduce physiological arousal and help you make clearer, more strategic decisions under stress. Now, let's pivot to the subject of addiction, which in many ways is an extreme form of stress regulation gone awry. Whether the addiction is to alcohol, nicotine, sugar, pornography, social media, or even compulsive thinking, the common denominator is the hijacking of the dopamine system. Dopamine is the molecule of motivation. It's what propels us toward things, but the mistake many make is believing that dopamine is only about pleasure. It's not. It's about anticipation, about pursuit, and repeated artificial spikes in dopamine, without sufficient recovery, lead to a crash in baseline dopamine levels. What follows is not just withdrawal or cravings, but a diminished ability to experience pleasure from natural rewards. One of the most effective science-based strategies for breaking addictions involves something called dopamine scheduling or dopamine fasting. This does not mean depriving yourself of all joy or going into monk mode forever. It means becoming aware of what behaviors and substances are artificially inflating dopamine and then reducing or spacing them out. When you abstain from a high dopamine activity for a while, your baseline levels begin to reset. You become more sensitive again, and you begin to experience joy from subtler, healthier stimuli like a walk, a conversation, a workout, or a meal. The data shows that even short breaks, 72 hours in many cases, can initiate this reset, but understanding dopamine isn't enough. To truly dismantle addiction, you also have to introduce friction between the cue and the behavior. There's something called the cue-routine reward loop, described in behavioral science. An external cue triggers a craving, which leads to a routine behavior and then a dopamine reward. If you can't eliminate the cue, change the routine. Create a pause between the urge and the action. That pause, often just 10 to 30 seconds, is where neuroplasticity can be redirected. In that space, the prefrontal cortex can engage, which is the part of the brain responsible for executive function, future planning, and impulse control. To strengthen the prefrontal cortex, certain behaviors are essential. Sleep is the foundation. Chronic sleep deprivation not only impairs decision-making but significantly lowers dopamine receptor availability in the striatum, the key area involved in motivation. Without sufficient sleep, it becomes almost impossible to override compulsive behavior. The data shows that even one night of sleep loss can reduce prefrontal activity and increase amygdala reactivity by up to 60%. That means your rational brain is offline and your emotional brain is on fire. Prioritize sleep. 8 hours, dark room, cool temperature, no screens 60 minutes before bed, and morning sunlight exposure to set your circadian rhythm. Exercise is another powerful intervention, not because it burns calories, but because it shifts neurochemistry. High-intensity interval training in particular has been shown to increase dopamine, serotonin, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, which is like miracle. Grow for your neurons. It enhances synaptic plasticity, the brain's ability to change, and when you're trying to break an addiction, that plasticity is essential. You need to weaken the old neural pathways and build new ones. Exercise creates the neurochemical conditions that make that possible. Nutrition also plays a role. Processed sugars, refined flours, and high-saturated fats can spike dopamine temporarily and contribute to the same addiction loops we see with drugs. Chronic consumption leads to dopamine resistance, much like insulin resistance. The goal is not to eliminate all pleasure from food, but to consume in a way that supports neurotransmitter balance. Tyrosine-rich foods like eggs, fish, nuts, and seeds help build dopamine. Omega-3 support neuronal membrane function, and fiber from vegetables and fruits supports gut health, which is increasingly linked to mental health via the gut-brain axis. Social connection is perhaps one of the most underrated tools for both stress reduction and addiction recovery. Oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, is released during meaningful interaction. It reduces cortisol, increases trust, and buffers the effects of stress. The science is clear. Loneliness and isolation increase mortality risk as much as smoking or obesity. If you're trying to break an addiction, you need people. You need accountability, support, and shared vulnerability. Whether it's a therapist, a recovery group, or a trusted friend, connection creates conditions where healing is possible. It's also worth mentioning that certain practices from contemplative traditions, now backed by empirical research, can assist both in stress regulation and addiction recovery. Meditation, especially mindfulness meditation, helps develop interoceptive awareness, your ability to sense your internal state. This matters because addiction often begins with disconnection from the body. We chase external highs because we're numb inside, but through meditation, you can begin to feel again, to notice the subtle shifts in breath, heart rate, temperature, and emotion. This re-embodiment process is essential. Over time, it builds meta-awareness so you can observe cravings without acting on them. Studies show that regular meditators experience changes in brain regions associated with attention, emotion regulation, and even pain perception. Now, none of these protocols are silver bullets, and they work best in combination. They work even better when layered consistently. Breathing, sleep, exercise, cold exposure, sunlight, proper nutrition, social support, and mindfulness are not just lifestyle choices. They are levers, biological and psychological levers, that you can pull every day. And what's important to understand is that you're not at the mercy of your neurochemistry. You are the architect of it. Through behavior, you can drive changes in brain structure and function. This is not wishful thinking, it's neuroplasticity. It's the science of change. For those struggling with severe addiction or chronic stress disorders, medical and psychiatric support is critical. Sometimes the system needs pharmacological support to rebalance. There is no shame in that, but what you do daily, your habits, your routines, your protocols, will always form the foundation of your long-term trajectory. Recovery isn't a single moment, it's a series of choices that compound over time. Remember that the brain's reward system is not inherently broken. It's just been miscalibrated, and it can be recalibrated. The same neuroplasticity that leads to addiction can be harnessed for transformation. The same neural pathways that carried pain can be redirected toward purpose. It takes effort, yes. It takes consistency, absolutely. But it's possible. You have the tools, you have the mechanisms, you have the science, and most importantly, you have the ability to engage those tools deliberately, consistently, and consciously. The body is not the enemy. The brain is not the enemy. They're simply waiting for the right inputs. Inputs that you now know how to give them. Use them. Let me know if you'd like a visual slide version, transcript format, or voiceover for this. It's also crucial to understand that stress and addiction share overlapping neural pathways. Chronic stress increases vulnerability to addiction, and addiction, in turn, increases the body's stress burden. This feedback loop can trap people for years. The hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal HPA axis, which governs our stress response, becomes dysregulated. Cortisol levels become either chronically elevated or suppressed. The brain becomes hypersensitive to threat cues and less responsive to natural rewards. This is why so many people relapse, not because of a lack of willpower, but because their system has been wired into a threat survival reward pattern that repeats until it's interrupted at the physiological level. One of the ways to reset this loop is through structured physical challenge. Physical challenge, especially when it involves voluntary discomfort, teaches the body how to push through discomfort in controlled settings. This has a profound effect on how we handle psychological stress. Resistance training, long-distance running, endurance events like rucking or swimming, all of these shift the body into a stress state and then, importantly, teach it how to recover. That recovery builds resilience. Every time you push yourself physically and then allow recovery, you are literally training your nervous system to become more adaptable. And adaptability is the true antidote to chronic stress. The science also tells us that time in nature, especially among green spaces and natural light, can recalibrate our stress circuits. This is not just about relaxation or aesthetics. It's deeply physiological. Phytoncide aromatic compounds released by trees have been shown to reduce stress hormones and enhance immune cell activity. Sunlight on the skin converts cholesterol into vitamin D, which modulates immune response and inflammation. Retinal exposure to natural light in the morning and during the day reinforces circadian alignment, supporting better sleep and hormone rhythms. The body and brain are designed to co-regulate with the natural environment. Disconnection from nature is not neutral. It's a stressor in and of itself, so something as simple as a daily walk in a park or barefoot grounding on the earth can yield significant shifts in stress biomarkers. Another often overlooked element in the stress addiction cycle is self-directed language. The internal dialogue we maintain either regulates or dysregulates our stress levels. Neuroscience has shown that certain patterns of self-talk activate different brain regions. Catastrophic or self-critical thoughts increase activity in the default mode network, a network associated with rumination, self-referential thought, and depression. On the other hand, deliberate, constructive internal statements activate the task, positive network, which is associated with goal-directed behavior and focus. This means that language is not just symbolic. It's physiological. How you speak to yourself changes your brain. Using second-person language, "you are okay," "you've done this before," has been shown to activate more objective processing and reduce emotional overload. This can be especially powerful during moments of craving or panic. Let's also consider light exposure and its impact on stress regulation. Light is not just something that allows us to see, it's a key input to the brain's regulatory systems. The retina has specialized cells, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, that detect sunlight and send signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master circadian clock. This clock controls the release of hormones like cortisol, melatonin, and growth hormone. Getting light in your eyes directly, not through windows or sunglasses, within 30 to 60 minutes of waking is one of the most effective ways to align circadian rhythms, support healthy stress hormone rhythms, and enhance mood. Without this input, cortisol rhythms become dysregulated, leading to brain fog, low energy, poor focus, and insomnia. Just 10 to 15 minutes of natural sunlight, even on cloudy days, is often enough to set this clock. This isn't optional if you're trying to manage stress or break behavioral addictions. It's foundational. Sleep, as mentioned earlier, is not just a rest period, it's an active anabolic state. During deep non-REM sleep, the brain undergoes synaptic downscaling, removing unnecessary connections and consolidating learning. During REM sleep, emotional memories are processed and integrated. People who are sleep-deprived show reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and increased reactivity in the amygdala, the perfect neurochemical storm for impulsive decisions and emotional reactivity. One night of poor sleep makes high-sugar, high-fat foods more appealing, it makes social cues more threatening, it makes cravings stronger and attention weaker. In short, sleep deprivation mimics the neurochemical state of stress and addiction. It makes us vulnerable to the very behaviors we're trying to overcome. This is why improving sleep hygiene, no screens before bed, consistent sleep, wake times, cool dark rooms, and avoiding caffeine after 2 p.m. is not a luxury. It's therapy, it's intervention. Hydration also plays a subtle yet critical role. Even mild dehydration, just 1 to 2%, can increase cortisol levels and impair mood and cognition. The brain is highly sensitive to fluid balance. Neurotransmitter production, synaptic firing, and even blood flow depend on proper hydration. If you're waking up and going straight to caffeine before drinking water, you're placing the system in an immediate stress state. Begin the day with 16 to 20 ounces of water, ideally with a pinch of sea salt or electrolytes. This supports adrenal health, brain function, and energy levels. And throughout the day, aim for consistent intake rather than binge drinking water all at once. Hydration isn't exciting, but it is essential. Let's talk about cravings. Those powerful, often overwhelming urges that feel like they come from nowhere and demand immediate action. Cravings are not random. They are learned associations between certain triggers and the anticipated dopamine reward. What the science tells us is that cravings usually follow a predictable curve. They rise, peak, and then decline. Most only last 5 to 10 minutes. If you can learn to ride the wave of the craving without acting on it, the brain begins to rewire. Each time you resist a craving and don't engage in the addictive behavior, you weaken the synaptic connection between cue and response. This is called extinction, and it's one of the most powerful tools we have, but extinction requires awareness. You have to notice the craving, label it, this is just a craving, not a command, and then use the tools, breathing, movement, hydration, social connection, and most importantly, time. Time is your ally. There is also compelling evidence for the use of visualizations, not just positive affirmations, but detailed mental rehearsals of resisting temptation or moving through a high-stress situation with composure. The brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined and real experiences when it comes to synaptic wiring, so rehearsing the response you want to have instead of the one you usually default to begins to rewire the circuitry. This is supported by studies on elite athletes, soldiers, and even recovering addicts. Mental rehearsal creates a kind of predictive coding in the brain. It tells the nervous system what to expect and how to respond. Over time, this becomes your new default, Music, too, has a surprisingly strong effect on stress and addiction pathways. Music can activate the brain's reward centers, modulate heart rate variability, and alter cortisol levels. Rhythmic music, in particular, can induce a trance-like state that promotes neuroplasticity. Many cultures have used rhythmic sound, drumming, chanting, humming, as a way to regulate the nervous system. Even slow tempo instrumental music has been shown to reduce anxiety and improve focus. Building playlists that anchor you to emotional regulation and memory can be a nonverbal yet deeply therapeutic practice. Let's not ignore the role of meaning. One of the greatest buffers against stress and one of the strongest predictors of addiction recovery is a sense of purpose. People who believe their actions matter, who see their lives as part of a greater narrative, have more resilience, more discipline, and more ability to endure hardship without collapsing into escapism. This is not about religious belief per se, though that can be part of it. It's about coherence, the belief that your life fits together in a meaningful way. Journaling, storytelling, service to others, creative expression, these are all routes to meaning. When you have a why, you can endure almost any how. And without a why, even the best protocols can feel mechanical and hollow. The nervous system does not operate in isolation. It's influenced by everything: your posture, your environment, your diet, your movement, your beliefs. Every system in the body is talking to every other system. The vagus nerve, for example, connects the brain to the heart, lungs, and gut. It's involved in everything from digestion to emotional regulation to heart rate variability. Practices that stimulate the vagus nerve, like humming, chanting, slow diaphragmatic breathing, and cold exposure, help regulate the entire stress axis. This is not mysticism. It's anatomy and neurophysiology. You can access calm and clarity through the body, often faster than through thought. Behavioral consistency is the final piece. All the tools in the world are irrelevant if they're not applied consistently. Neuroplasticity is driven by repetition. What you do once changes very little. What you do consistently changes everything. Small actions, repeated daily, rewire the system. This is why protocols are more effective than goals. A goal says, I want to stop drinking. A protocol says, every morning I get sunlight, hydrate, move, and journal. The protocol creates the conditions in which the goal becomes achievable. The brain doesn't respond to motivation. It responds to structure. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And the good news is that you can design those systems today, starting small, building momentum, and letting the biology do the rest. The shift from stress and compulsion to clarity and control is not a mystery. It's biology applied skillfully, the tools are available, the research is robust, and the responsibility is personal. Let me know when you're ready for the final 2,000-word segment, or if you'd like this converted into audio, slides, or video script. What we've laid out are not just ideas or theories. They are actionable science-backed protocols grounded in our current understanding of the brain, the body, and behavior. When applied consistently, they don't just help manage stress or reduce the grip of addiction. They change the very architecture of your nervous system. They allow you to reclaim agency where you once felt powerless. The path isn't always easy and there are no shortcuts, but it is clear. Anchor yourself in physical movement, regulate through breath and light, nourish with purpose, sleep like it's sacred, and build systems that support who you are becoming, not just who you've been. Because with every small, consistent action, you're not just surviving, you're reprogramming, you're becoming the architect of your own biology, and that more than anything is what true freedom looks like.